Bro, that relationship feels like a joke that's gone on too long. She's nowhere near my level. They laughed like hyenas circling something dying. My husband leaned back in his chair, chin high, soaking in their approval like sunlight. The clinking of glasses, the low jazz, the smell of whiskey, it all burned into me. I smiled. Calmly. Almost sweetly. Why wait a year? I said, tilting my head. Let's end it today. He blinked, still grinning, thinking I was bluffing. I wasn't. That was the last thing I said before I stood up, grabbed my purse and walked out, heels echoing across marble floors that once felt like home. My name is Marissa Hale, I'm 31. And if you think you know how this ends, stay tuned. Because sometimes, the cruelest thing you can give a man who underestimates you is the silence of your absence. Do you ever wonder how someone who claims to love you can talk about you like you're a burden? I drove with no destination, just headlights cutting through the wet night. The ring on my finger felt heavier than the car itself. By the time I reached the city limits, I'd already decided. No screaming, no tears, no public meltdown. My revenge would be quieter than his laughter, sharper than his pride. I checked into a hotel under my maiden name. The receptionist didn't even ask for ID. Maybe she saw the storm in my eyes. I sat on the edge of the bed and watched the city blink. A heartbeat of lights, fast and cruel. He didn't call. He didn't text. Of course not. He thought I'd crawl back like always. But then around midnight my phone lit up. New message, Ryan, his best friend. You don't deserve what he said. None of it. You've always been the one keeping him afloat. I stared at the screen, my breath catching. Another message followed. If you knew what he's been hiding, you wouldn't just walk away. You'd burn the whole thing down. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, like it had been waiting for that line. And for the first time that night, I smiled. I didn't sleep that night. The words, what he's been hiding, looped like a heartbeat I couldn't silence. By dawn, the rain had stopped, but the city still looked bruised, gray, swollen with secrets. Ryan's message sat unread in my notifications, daring me to open it again. He and my husband Ethan had been friends since college. The kind of friendship built on shared arrogance and half-truths. So if Ryan was breaking that code, it meant something serious. I finally typed, "What do you mean hiding?" He replied instantly, "Check the email I just sent you. But don't call him yet." The email subject, "You need to see this." Inside were screenshots. Messages between Ethan and another woman. Not just any woman. Vanessa. His ex, the one who had been my maid of honor. Their words were casual, flirtatious. Recent. The date stamp hit me like a punch. Last week. One photo showed them laughing together in my kitchen. My mug in her hand. My apron on her shoulders. I didn't cry. I just stared, my body numb but my mind strangely clear. The pieces began to fit. His sudden late meetings. His new cologne. The way he'd flinched when I mentioned Vanessa at dinner. My reflection in the hotel mirror looked foreign. Detached. I whispered. He chose humiliation. I'll choose precision. Ryan texted again. You're not the first woman he's done this to. But you might be the last if you play it right. Play it right. The phrase hung there, dangerous and tempting. By noon I'd made a list. Joint accounts, business partnerships, the house deed under my name, the charity events I funded but he took credit for. Every secret power he didn't realize I still held. I deleted our shared photos one by one until only a blank grid remained. Then I whispered to the empty room. You wanted a woman beneath your level? Let's see how far you fall without me. Outside, the city pulsed with noise again, horns, chatter, life moving on. But for Ethan Hale, time was about to stop. By the next morning, the air felt heavier, like the world itself was holding its breath. I hadn't spoken to Ethan, hadn't even opened his last message from 2 nights ago. But I could feel him starting to realize something was off. At 8:03 a.m. his text arrived. Where are you? Stop being dramatic. We can talk like adults. Adults. The same word he'd used when he called me immature for crying after catching him in a lie. I almost laughed. Instead, I forwarded the screenshots Ryan had sent. Every word, every photo, and simply typed. Here's your adult conversation. 10 minutes later he called. I didn't answer. I watched the screen vibrate until the light dimmed. Silence had power now and I was finally learning to use it. I opened my laptop and logged into our joint investment account, the one I'd built while he was busy building his ego. My name sat first on every document. I'd been the guarantor, the silent strength. Now that silence was shifting. I withdrew my shares. Finally. Wiggly. Without a trace of emotion. Then I transferred his name off the property lease for our penthouse. I had every right. The contract bore my initials, not his. The city outside hummed. Somewhere below, people were rushing to work, sipping coffee, starting their normal days. Mine had just begun too, but it wasn't normal anymore. Ryan called. This time I picked up. His voice was low, careful. He's losing it. Called me last night, said you embarrassed him in front of the guys. Did I? I said quietly. Or did he do that himself? Ryan hesitated. You know, Marissa, if you really want to destroy him, you don't have to shout. Just make him invisible. Invisible. The word sank into me like a seed finding soil. That was it. Not revenge through chaos, revenge through erasure. As I closed my laptop, I could already picture Ethan's face when he'd realized the empire he bragged about had one silent architect. And she just walked away. The next morning I packed a small box, not for drama, only practicality. 3 shirts, the old photograph of us at the coast which I kept out of spite, and the velvet ring box I'd never opened since the fight. I left the box at the reception with a note, for Ethan, keeping things orderly. The clerk nodded as if she'd seen stranger exits. I moved through the city like someone rearranging furniture in a house that wasn't theirs. At the accountant's office I signed papers. At the bank I met a woman in sensible shoes who asked me about beneficiaries as if she'd been waiting for this exact conversation all her life. I answered calmly with the boring legal language of contracts and numbers. Later, a barista handed me coffee without asking my name. She squinted at me, then mouthed, "You look different." I touched my hair, the smell of the espresso burned my fingers. Small human things kept me anchored. Ethan sent another voice note, 3 seconds of breathing, then, "You can't do this." I left it unread. Let him keep the sound of himself pleading. I had taken his money, his title, and his place on paper. Now I wanted something subtler. Reputation. The charity gala next month was his public stage. His speech, his trophy smiles, his forced humility in front of donors who loved his name. I called the event coordinator, gave them a small, inconvenient detail about the keynote. A scheduling conflict they hadn't anticipated. I did not lie. I simply reminded them of an obscure clause in the donation agreement that required his presence be verified in writing. Suddenly his keynote was in limbo. At lunch, Vanessa's number flashed on my phone. My fingers hovered. Call her, expose her, make her sweat. The old me would have. The new me closed the call. Instead I texted one line. "We need to talk. Alone." She replied with a single emoji, a closed-mouth smile. That was the first decoy. That evening, while rifling through old files for a tax receipt, I found a receipt for a watch. Not mine. His handwriting on the back. For Ryan, thanks for everything. The watch brand I'd never liked. A tiny, cheap token of loyalty. I put it in my pocket. It felt absurdly heavy. Back at the hotel, the city spread below like a constellation of small, honest lights. I sat on the sill and watched them, thinking about how quickly trust becomes currency. My phone buzzed. A forwarded screenshot from Ryan. Ethan had already started calling people asking where I'd gone. One name at the bottom stopped me cold. Harrison Black, Trustee Mutual Fund Counsel. A small smile creased my face. I had the next step. I remembered Harrison Black, the polished attorney who'd once told Ethan, "Your wife's signature adds credibility." Credibility. That was me. The ghost behind his image. So I scheduled a meeting. Harrison arrived 20 minutes late, all charm and cologne. He smiled when he saw me. "Didn't expect you alone, Marissa." "I didn't expect to be invisible," I said. "But here we are." He hesitated, trying to read me. I opened my tablet, scrolling through the documents I'd quietly compiled. Tax filings, charitable grants, offshore transfers, all under Ethan's consulting firm. Except the trail led directly to our joint holdings. "I want my name off every paper that bears his debts," I said. Harrison's eyes flickered. "You realize what that means for him?" "Yes," I said softly. "That's the point." By the time I left his office, the air felt cleaner. The weight was shifting. Ethan was calling everyone, desperate to know how his accounts had been compromised. He didn't know the irony yet. They hadn't been compromised. They were simply mine. That night Ryan called again. "He's spiraling. he said. Smashed his phone. He thinks Vanessa leaked something. She didn't, I said. I did. There was a pause. Then Ryan whispered, he'll come for you, you know. I smiled into the dark. Then I'll make sure there's nothing left to find. The city was quiet again. I packed my files neatly, labeled everything. Even revenge when done right deserves organization. Before I slept, another text arrived. From Vanessa. I can't do this anymore. He's been lying to both of us. Attached was a video, Ethan in our living room ranting, breaking things, shouting my name like it was a curse. I watched it once. Then again. Then I forwarded it to the Herald reporter who'd covered his last charity scandal. No caption, no explanation. Just the truth served silently. Outside, a gust of wind slammed the window shut, like punctuation from the universe. Ethan wanted a war. I'd already written the ending. The morning the Herald ran the clip, Ethan's life hiccuped like a song stuck on a broken note. Notifications flooded my phone. Messages, missed calls, strangers tagging me with sympathetic emojis. I let them thread through me like rain on glass. I didn't answer a single one. Silence was still my sharpest move. At the office, reporters called Harrison. Donors called the charity. The gala coordinator emailed again, curt and panicked. Ethan's name began to smell faintly of scandal, like perfume that had overstayed its welcome. He texted me twice that day. Both messages were long with apology-shaped words. I kept my responses short. None. I walked into the small cafe where Vanessa had asked to meet, the one with the cracked tile and the barista who named each latte with an accent of care. She arrived with sunglasses and a bruise of exhaustion under her eyes. She sat, took them off, and for a second I saw the girl who'd once been laughing in my kitchen with my mug in her hand. Now she looked hollowed out. Did you send the tape? She asked. Her voice was thin, not defensive. Just tired. I forwarded what was already true, I said. You were never the problem, Vanessa. He was. She nodded slowly. He told me he loved me. Then he told his friends he was bored. I didn't know which lie to hate. We sat like that, two women who'd been folded into his story and now unfolded back out. Vanessa slid a small envelope across the table. Inside, a receipt, a token, nothing dramatic, but it confirmed the pattern I'd been mapping. She said, I want out. Clean break. But I want him to know what he lost. Later, Ryan sent a clipped audio. He's canceling the gala sponsorship. Board's furious. He's trying to call donors and no one picks up. The word canceling tasted like victory and like something ruinous at once. I felt oddly serene. This wasn't about schadenfreude anymore. It was about rearranging consequences so they fit the crime. That night I stood at the hotel window, the city lights like witnesses. I thought of the ring in my drawer, of the photograph on my desk, of the velvet box I'd left at the reception. I reached into my pocket and pulled out that cheap watch, the one marked for Ryan. I set it on the sill and watched it catch the street lamp. Time kept walking indifferent. He had built his life on borrowed minutes. Tonight I planned the clock he'd never hear. Ethan finally called from an unknown number. I answered because silence had done its work. Now it was time for sound. Marissa, he said, his voice cracking between fury and disbelief. You ruined me. I closed my eyes, letting the accusation hang there. No, I replied. You built the fire and stood too close. He exhaled sharply. They pulled the sponsorships, the papers twisted everything. Vanessa, Ryan, even Harrison won't return my calls. Do you understand what you've done? I understand perfectly, I said. You once said I wasn't at your level. Turns out you were right. The line went dead. I didn't block him. I wanted him to keep wondering when I'd speak again. I spent the afternoon at the park near the old townhouse. Our first home before the penthouse, before ego replaced love. Kids were playing, leaves cracked under my boots, and I realized I hadn't breathed deeply in weeks. Peace felt like something expensive I'd finally afforded. Ryan texted later. He's moving out. Sold the car. Vanessa's gone. I typed, then erased my reply 3 times. What was left to say? Revenge had done its job. But closure, that was something else. That night I walked back to the hotel lobby, asked for the velvet box I'd left at reception. Inside was the engagement ring. Small, silver, unremarkable. I held it up to the city lights. It didn't sparkle. It just existed, dull and honest. I left it on the counter with a note, return to sender. Back in my room, a message from Ryan blinked again. He's asking if you'll meet him tomorrow. Says he wants to talk. I stared at it for a long time. The old me would have gone, needed closure, needed the performance of apology. But the new me typed 3 words. I already did. The truth was simple, he'd already heard everything I needed to say. Just not with words. Tomorrow I'd meet someone else. The lawyer finalizing the last transfer. My freedom would finally have a signature. The next morning the sun came in like forgiveness. Slow, quiet, uninvited. I packed my things without rush. The hotel hallway smelled faintly of citrus cleaner and new beginnings. Downstairs the receptionist smiled and handed me a small envelope. It was left for you early this morning, she said. Inside was a single folded page, Ethan's handwriting. No apology, no pleading. Just 3 lines. You win. I never thought you'd walk away for real. Everything's gone. I don't even hate you, I envy you. I stood there for a long moment, the paper trembling between my fingers. Not from sadness, from release. Outside the world moved on. Horns, voices, life. I walked to the small cafe on 7th Street, the same one where I'd met Vanessa. The barista remembered me. Decaf latte, right? She said with a grin. I smiled back. No, I replied. Something stronger today. As I waited, I noticed a woman at the corner table crying quietly, scrolling through her phone, her ring still shining. I almost told her it gets better, that silence can be armor. But some lessons have to be lived, not borrowed. My phone buzzed again, this time from Harrison, the attorney. All done. You're officially free and sole owner of all properties. Congratulations, Mrs. Hale. I stared at the screen, then typed. Just Marissa now. When I stepped outside, a light breeze carried the city's noise like background music. For the first time in years I didn't feel small. I didn't feel angry. Just clean. Later that evening I went to the waterfront, the same place Ethan had proposed under cheap fireworks. I took off my shoes, walked barefoot to the edge and dropped the ring he'd once chosen into the dark water. It didn't splash loud, it just vanished quietly, perfectly. My reflection in the ripples looked unfamiliar. Stronger. Softer. As I turned to leave, the streetlights flickered once and steadied. I smiled to myself. Some endings don't need noise. Just peace.